Whether you love him, you hate him, or you thought you'd seen enough of him after all of these years and are forever surprised by how far his content can be stretched for a TV show to continue putting him in the front and center of all of Nickelodeon, one way or another, this famous little yellow sponge has been running around on your TV screen for the last 20 years. SpongeBob SquarePants is one of those rare animated icons of television, pulling in massive viewership numbers and a following of people, while still being far more unique compared to any other TV show around it. Starting officially in 1999, SpongeBob has faced many different bumps along the road he calls a career, from this seemingly golden age of his early years despite the lower animation quality, to the shift into digital reinvention and the strain of remaining creative, to the memey resurgence of his popularity thanks to the rise of the internet, and onwards to wherever he is as of right now, still being somewhat noticed by fans across multiple generations. And naturally, with such big attention comes a big spotlight to highlight the absorbent little sod even further. The SpongeBob series has amassed 2 major feature films over the last 2 decades, with a third one coming along very soon. Yes, you may be divided on whether or not modern day SpongeBob is of actual quality, but one unavoidable fact you'll have to face is the fact that the SpongeBob movie is coming back. Throwback to 2004, and we come to a pivotal moment in the SpongeBob career path. With the series outlasting several years, talks were coming into place for the franchise to finally come to an end. And though Steven Hillenburg, the marine-loving creator of SpongeBob SquarePants, rejected several prior offers for a full-length film, he finally buckled for the plot of one movie, to be titled by the grand name of the SpongeBob movie. Hey, if it works. This film was also set to be the supposed finale of the SpongeBob series, acting as a neat little spongy knot to tie the world into a simple little ending. Or at least, that was the idea until Nickelodeon ordered more episodes due to its profitable successes. Adding a little more spice to the SpongeBob formula here in 2004, Hillenburg used this film as being his final contribution to the series, as he wished to leave the show as showrunner, instead passing the role along for the foreseeable future going into this new era of SpongeBob. Needless to say, it was a pretty important time in the timeline of SpongeBob's history, and though 7 or 8-year-old me didn't know it, in a way, I could kind of feel it. My personal connection to SpongeBob had me hating him and the series when I was very young, to getting worryingly into it as I grew a tad older, though that may have just been through pure exposure and boredom over everything else. Still, by the time the movie came out, I was very much on board with watching it, and it very much felt like the final good SpongeBob episode for a long while. This new era of SpongeBob was noticeable, and though I didn't stay for long because I was less of a fan of this new SpongeBob and this weird thing going on in my real life that I'd rather not talk about in too much detail, I could tell that SpongeBob had changed and I didn't really want to stick around with him any longer. So fast forward to the year 2015, the year of Pluto, same-sex marriage, the dress, and me flying the nest and living at university for the very first time. And SpongeBob, despite having a bit more of a rocky decade of his own, was still standing very much on top with attention and enough backing from Nickelodeon to gun him yet another feature-length film for him to spread his legs with. Not to mention, Hillenburg was still floating around production, taking on an advisory role on TV episodes for a few years now, and helping to write this second film out. This time given an actual title of The SpongeBob Movie, A Sponge Out of Water.
Oh, I get it!
Very much running with the newish internet resurgence of SpongeBob's popularity, the movie continued many elements of what we love most about SpongeBob, though shied away from being any kind of direct sequel. And after 10 years, you'd think it'd be overdue by now. So as a now 18 or 19-year-old readying up for life at university, this movie went completely over my head, to the point that I didn't know it existed for at least another 2 years. I was probably too busy working on a million A-levels. So now here we are in 2019, with a third movie on the way. We don't have any trailer footage or specific details to really tell us about the premise of the movie, other than that it's a prequel with a title that makes less and less sense. It's a wonderful sponge? At least with a sponge out of water. It's the word like tell us, but the quality of the wordplay in the title is just not up to par. Regardless, all we can really gather is it's about SpongeBob. Surprise, surprise, from the SpongeBob movie. But what we also have at our disposal is 2 closely related films to this project which we can now judge to help construct our understanding of the direction for this yellow sponge boy. One I have seen and one I haven't. And to add an extra little flair to things, we'll be analysing these 2 movies simultaneously, comparing pretty much every element to see what did best. Is SpongeBob on the right path of quality, or is my nostalgia telling me that the first one is a gold mine? Or maybe they're both trash. It's time to find out. And hey, 90% of my views are from non-subscribers, so do your part and subscribe already, or else this Krabby Patty gets it. Oh, what am I talking about? This was a dumb idea. So interestingly enough, despite being a fully animated TV show, it's become a bit of a theme that the SpongeBob movies must have some live-action segments crammed into their runtime, and both films start off with an IRL pirate adventure. My nostalgia told me that the first film had the usual pirate protagonist, but apparently it's just some dude who looks vaguely similar to the opening theme pirate. And fittingly enough, the first film burst out into the SpongeBob theme song through the pirates singing for SpongeBob in their normal heartily fashion, keeping the action fun and campy as they're excited with the prospect of getting their dirty hands on tickets to see the SpongeBob movie. Whoa, I love it. A Sponge Out of Water, however, takes a slightly different approach, with a single pirate discovering a book telling the story of SpongeBob SquarePants and stealing it for himself. And once he returns to his ship, there's a crowd of CG seagulls who come to pester him, with their voices that they can speak through. And together they enthusiastically sing the theme as the pirate tries to shush them. Also, fun fact, depending on the version of the film you're watching, their voices may play you with the memory of Joe Sugg, Robert Irwin, Nolan North, and Alan Carr as they voice some of these seagulls. This whole forcing the seagulls into the plot felt a little out of place though, and honestly doesn't seem all that charming either. Seeing all these manly pirates dancing and forcing their way into a cinema screening was a great contrast of character, but singing CG seagulls? Yeah, it's not really there for me. Plus, the beginning of this film is riddled with fart jokes. Quality. Put the two side by side, and I gotta say, one is clearly taking the lead thus far. Now, we're not going to tackle both films chronologically, so next I want to talk about innovation. Something I'm always a fan of when a popular series gets adapted into a new format, be it through a direct sequel or a whole nother feature-length format, is the changes of the world and its scenarios to bring forth something new for the series to chew on. And when it comes to these two films, their approaches couldn't really be too much farther apart from each other. Generally, when it comes to TV to film adaptations, I'd say there are two main options for where to plant the premise of the film, and honestly, it's pretty simple really. Do you treat it like a spin-off to the world, or do you keep it closely within its boundaries? And to make things even more clear-cut, the actual premise of the plot is actually pretty copied and pasted between both films. Both have the major source of conflict be somewhat through the abduction of the Krabby Patty formula, or at the very least some kind of crab's plankton rivalry, and the quest needed in order to retrieve whatever is missing and save the day. So what I mean by the spin-off approach is more in line with what the original SpongeBob movie decided to do to approach this plotline, as it added significant amounts of new content to be covered entirely through the movie's runtime in order to keep the concept of the film fresh and to allow for the creators to have full reign to make whatever the hell they wish. All while keeping in a good chunk of original references to keep it chained into the same SpongeBob world. With its open boundaries, it was free to introduce a new version of King Neptune and this daughter Mindy. It gave us a loophole in boating rules with the Patty Wagon. It introduced a surplus of entirely new worlds and locations, and it opened up more of the lore of the SpongeBob world, as well as a little more of what's going on the surface beyond just simple puppetry animation. For young me, this all worked great to keep me interested and excited to see more of these new scenarios play out. And maybe it could even get some coverage in the main TV series to see it fully realized, or so I wished. And while clearly a very effective form of adapted storytelling, there is a significantly different way for the premise to be covered, as seen by the second movie, which chose to keep its boundaries much closer in order to extend the amount of in-world references available to flaunt, as well as keep the film more in tone with the actual TV series it's based off of, merely extending its wingspan with the help of a larger budget and time emphasis. This approach still allows for room for some innovative ideas, but at its core, makes the film feel more like one largely extended episode, which, considering the popularity and success of the SpongeBob idea as a whole, certainly isn't a bad idea to go with. Using this approach, our main characters are forced to stay in those famously recognizable locations for much longer, allowing for far more references to be put into place, be it through long-forgotten character cameos, screen time, and dialogue options to help balance against the gigantic cast of the SpongeBob world, or to simply feel a closer connection to the world of SpongeBob through its more intense coverage and reaction to the events going on around it. It's less of a distant background event as it is in the first movie. Now, unless your favourite character is Smitty Werbenman Jensen, chances are your favourite character will be making some sort of appearance in the plot, and the film as a whole, even if it's just at the ending. Now, technically, I shouldn't really be putting these two comparisons head to head, as they're simply both effective yet different formats for the film, but I must admit, both have substantial amounts of benefits. In the newer film, I did enjoy seeing a whole lot more of Sandy Cheeks and Gary the Snail, and how each character responded differently to the crisis going on around them, whilst the variety of new concepts introduced in the original film still felt investing, as if it was a whole new chapter of SpongeBob, fitting considering it was the planned end. But at the end of the day, I still feel like I personally would place the original ahead of the second here too, for a couple of reasons. For a start, I feel the imaginative new stuff far outweighs the referential old stuff shown off in the second film. And secondly, I feel the intense focus on staying in Bikini Bottom for so long, and especially the Krusty Krab, when we know all along that the characters are gonna end up all CG'd up and on the surface, just ended up overstaying its welcome and felt like a slow crawl to get to the part we're actually looking forward to. The original film is always moving forwards, and so there's never really a point of getting distracted or bored upon watching. But hey, that could just be me. Still, different is different, you know? And what could highlight the difference between a decade better than the jokes?
My life!
Oh boy, the jokes. Nothing dates a film more prominently than some of the jokes they tell, and though you'd think I'm talking about the 2004 version, I'm actually talking about a sponge out of water, cause it puts in some seriously date-heavy references. SpongeBob is timeless, right? Animation of all things never ages, and with a series as long as SpongeBob, there's sure to be all sorts of content and memories that can be brought back up and feel like not a day has gone by since the last time we saw them. But you know what does kinda age, despite being the same animated concept over and over? Memes. Yes, you heard me right. There are memes in this movie. Obviously, with this film releasing in 2015, the internet had long taken off, and meme culture had swallowed us all whole by this point. And with it came a seemingly endless wave of SpongeBob memes. You know the one, they've been popping up all video probably. And though this SpongeBob movie did try to keep things fairly subtle, not letting them get in the way of the actual plot or anything, it did sneak one in right at the end of the film. During the end credits, no less. And I feel no matter how they could have handled it, it still just feels like it's like your mum trying to act cool in front of you, rather than being a particularly good joke or reference. Especially when ham-fisted in and outright named right beforehand. Here's the meme for you in case you haven't seen it.
You know what this needs? A little interpretive dance. Yeah.
And it really doesn't sit well with me. Of all people, why would you pick a Squidward meme and the one least likely to fall for this internet crap? And done in such an unsubtle way that it really just feels too forced to be genuine comedy. But then again, I'm sure many kids would have loved this reference just from being something external that they recognize, you know? Now, obviously in 2004, memes weren't really a thing, so that kind of content is impossible to make an appearance apart from the stuff that originated here, but even still, with it being a different decade, there is a dynamically large difference in how the script for the original film laid out its jokes. And honestly, I don't see them doing too great either. No, really. While it's more common these days for elements of comedy to be placed more directly in the dialogue of the characters in whatever which scene, back in 2004 with a particularly animated format pushed the original to show off more visual slapstick comedy as was the standard for SpongeBob's comedy as a whole. It's kind of what you'd expect from a kids show like SpongeBob, simply being strange to look at for kids and adults alike and being so unusual that it's somewhat humorous through its insanity. But at the same time, when looking through pretty much all of these jokes throughout the movie, I find them not actually all that funny. Sure, they're memorable and I can quote them all day, but nothing really made me laugh. Watching the SpongeBob movie at most gave me 90 minutes of breathing out of my nose on occasion. That's its peaking reaction. And that's not to say that it's the only form of the original movie's jokes. There's plenty of in-dialogue ones that are okay, I guess, and funny moments that can get a huh out of me at most, but beyond that, there's really no laugh-out-loud jokes in this entire movie, only references that are fun to witness. Now contrast that with the newer movie, and I know I already covered the crappy meme at the end, but actually, when watching the real jokes in the movie, they're surprisingly good. And even better than just being a lol random joke, a lot of them fit really nicely into the world of SpongeBob, exploring creative ways to play with the iconic character traits that we know. Like Plankton being tortured through SpongeBob's incessant laughing, or the literal food fight having the same orders from General Krabs and Sandy Cheeks as a customer, giving us the visual gag of holding the mayo. It had surprisingly innovative ideas for a 2-decade-old gimmick. Or even just the sly meta jokes about the surrounding context, they're good. And then there's the crappy ones, like Patrick talking to his own butt, or the snail chase that we've all seen before. Still though, when directly comparing the two movies in regards to jokes, overall, the original movie keeps a more consistent rate of with memorable moments, but nothing hysterical, whilst Sponge Out of Water has some genuinely smart humor that sometimes really hits, and sometimes really misses. It plays with established concepts better because of its structured layout, making it have both the best and the worst jokes. But for me personally, I gotta say, the second one is just flat out funnier. The comedy feels smart, it hosts weight and isn't just funny characters doing funny things. Joke-wise, it's simply the superior movie. I guess that's modern filmmaking for you. The best thing the first movie has is its aftermath of Gooby Gooba Rock. That's my favorite, you know, SpongeBob up high and Patrick still in leggings. Mwah, beautiful. Alright, let's finally talk story and the character exploration we see along the way. I've already rambled long enough about the different structural approaches to the two films, but now let's talk about how they actually fit into the story of each of the films. From story beat zero, both films tackle the idea of the Krabby Patty formula being stolen, however dip the premise in two entirely different contexts. With the original surrounding the opening of the second Krusty Krab and King Neptune's crown being stolen and framed onto Mr. Krabs so that Plankton can steal it from him. Meanwhile, the second film heats with the standard attack story with a creative flair and leads into a mystery heaped in realistic character responses. Both are great openers to the film and showcase quite nicely the general tone and themes attached to each of the films. With SpongeBob being rejected at the start of the first movie due to his immaturity, which will soon become a running theme he has to battle with across the film, whilst the meddling of a third party in the second film and the reveal that Plankton isn't the big baddie behind it all thrusts more of the idea of seeing his perspective on the world and the development of his actions further. Now it's here that there's a bit more of a divide in what I would argue is really effective, as both films have their final arc piece lead them to the surface. Spoilers, that's where both the crown and the Krabby Patty formula have been hoisted away. However, one film has a more refined manner of reaching that destination. The second film, as Sponge Out of Water, you know, the one named after the act of being on the surface, the one that almost had all of its marketing pushing the CGI gimmick of the final act of the film taking place in the real world, yeah? That second film. The SpongeBob SquarePants Movie 2 film, yeah? Well, that film doesn't actually reach the surface. You know, where all the trailers were showcasing scenes and sneak peeks towards, that one. It's not reached until 1 hour into the hour-and-a-half long film, and no matter what way you squeeze it, that's bad pacing at its best and false advertising at its worst. And you can really feel it. Knowing the context of where the film ends up, the first 2/3 of this movie really drag on, and the resolution is found in a really unappealing way whereby SpongeBob and Krabs, at the last minute, smell the Krabby Patties from miles and miles and miles away. A stretch of a plot device to get it moving, right? Now the first movie gets to the surface in a similar time too, at about 54 minutes in, and yet the pacing is not nearly an issue here as it came through a natural progression of the story as SpongeBob and Patrick set out on an individual adventure which had initially started at the 30-minute mark, very much making the film feel like it was moving forward rather than repeating itself over the same scenes like the second film did, kind of like a loop that felt like it wasn't going anywhere. Another point that really didn't settle well with me was the integration of the surface with the second movie. So from all those trailers, we know that SpongeBob and friends are gonna be turned into CG characters, but how does that exactly work and how are they supposed to breathe up there? Well, the movie covers it by using a very long-winded Deus Ex Machina, whereby a galaxy-overseeing dolphin comes to their rescue and uses magic. And though it's technically not a Deus Ex Machina, since it is established earlier on in a seemingly random plot sequence, it still feels a little out of left field and simply doesn't sit right with me. But in all fairness, the exact same sense came across in the original when SpongeBob magically gains the powers to save all Helmet residents with the power of bursting into rock and accepting his childlike manner. Though at least in that case, it's somewhat rooted in the theme of being a kid. I don't know. SpongeBob movies are goofy, and one way or another you just gotta go with it, I guess. Still, once the surface arc is reached in both films, however contrived, both films have entirely different final arcs, with the original movie having SpongeBob succeed and simply struggle to get back home, whilst the second movie has SpongeBob continue the quest with a final fight against live-action pirate Burger Beard, which I shamefully didn't realise at first. And really, both are pretty fun. It's nice to finally see the characters in their CG forms after all that marketing, and it's cool to see how the logic of the surface works in the first film. By this point, both are enjoyable in their own little ways, though the overacting in the second movie is much more refined than the first, because in the first one it just looks really odd. The first film also has the weird crux moment of throwing in a Baywatch reference in the form of David Hasselhoff to date the film and entertain the audience in the room, I guess. It's very strange and plot devicey, but it also expands to be quite fun with how unrealistic they made his swimming, and it all made for a perfect little arena to fight Dennis for the first time, which was strangely investing to see. Overall, a really good and gripping last chunk. And as for the sequel, yeah, that's fun too. I liked seeing how each character responded to the beach and the confrontations of Burger Beard, though the plot did get a little muddled as the characters were teleported away to some random island with a pun name and then teleported back. But after that, the actual fight scene with everyone's favourite characters was cool to see reimagined again, like an old SpongeBob episode. Though the actual chase of the ship I remember losing attention to. Maybe it got a little too generic car chasey to me, I don't know. Still, one way or another, the day is saved. All is brought back to normal, and the daily life of SpongeBob and friends goes back to being normal. Be it through foiling Plankton's plans, through the power of rock and roll, or by returning the secret formula and Plankton just playing into his role again. Overall, both have their pros and cons, with the sequel showing off more of their characters and giving us a cool meta plotline with some nice connections to the surface world, whilst the original introduces cool concepts, memorable moments, and a nice theming of maturity across SpongeBob and a little bit of Patrick. So the surprise YouTube cameo appearance in the second film from Nice Peter and Epic Lloyd was a surprise to see. And then there's the forced rap battle at the end. You know what, let's move on to that as an actual final little point. The songs. These SpongeBob movies aren't musicals, but they always seem to have a musical number or two snuck in there. We've already spoken about the opening theme song in both, so I won't bore you with that one again, but instead let's compare the next two songs back to back. At the halfway mark of the original movie, SpongeBob and Patrick survive the monsters of a deadly trench through the power of song and their false sense of security as mature men. This is a fantastic tune and one that perfectly gets into your brain on repeat. And the visuals are pretty nice too, as it's connected to the action and tells a campy little hero story instead of what could potentially be a really horrifying sequence. And the concept of not being eaten because of music is just another funny nose moment to see. Compare that to the sequel song, Teamwork. SpongeBob and Plankton are coming to terms with working together, and it feels more like an actual music number, but with talk singing, and it's just not memorable, and the visuals aren't very interesting considering they're just standing talking to each other. Like, it gets the story going forward somewhat, but it's just not a fun song. Maybe it doesn't count, but to me, it just felt like a step backwards for the whole film. Plus, it was almost too recognizable. This movie segment feels like a repeat of old episodes, with this bit just being a crappier version of the fun song chucked onto the plot of... In almost every way, it just seems to fall flat. And then there's the second song in each movie, the finale song. The original had the iconic... Whilst the second film has, get this, a full epic rap battle of history segment between the new characters of the movie. One gets a giant Deus Ex Machina for SpongeBob saving the day, and the other is one big old reference for the audience members who get it. But even then, I still don't think it's all that good. And part of the thing I like so much about other epic rap battle songs is that the two combatants are related somehow. Spartan versus Spartan, spy versus spy, fictional lovers versus... you get it. The connection between the overseeing dolphin and the seagulls is that they're both in the SpongeBob movie. And they're talking animals. But so is the entire cast. To me, it just felt a little too much. The cameo in the live action segments weren't too bad, but throwing in this entire rap didn't really impress me. Maybe people were going crazy in this moment, and it's memorable in its own way. Whatever it is, when it comes to songs, pretty much across the board, I've still got to give it to the original because those songs are still making an impact on us after all these years. The only impressive part in the sequel is the fact that YouTubers made it far enough to get into this movie. So with all that talk about structure, creativity, jokes, story, and songs, what could be said about the two films overall, and what does this mean for the upcoming third movie? But I gotta stay firm on my idea that the original film is still the superior movie. The things it explores and the way it portrays them is just an absolute win to me, even if I am to admit that the sequel is a funnier film with better jokes. The original is a fun joy to witness all the way through, whilst the sequel has the strongest laughs and the lowest lows, and I'd only really want to watch the CG part again, skipping the whole first hour of the film. And that tells me the film ain't so great. Now, the super sequel to the SpongeBob movies is set to be a prequel to the TV program, presumably hosting an even younger SpongeBob. Judging by these prior movies, it'll likely be a smooth mesh between reinventing characters we already know, seeing the birth of maybe Patrick's friendship, Mr. Krabs as an employer-to-be, and who knows, maybe Squidward's happy, whilst also combining with heaps of new content like SpongeBob's life before Bikini Bottom. Maybe we'll see more of SpongeBob's family, or his childhood friend that he forgot or something. Maybe Gary will be found in the street and adopted, and maybe SpongeBob will still have to save the day in some capacity, either exiling him out to a new town or solidifying his place in Bikini Bottom for the first time. I mean, since both movies tackled the Krabby Patty formula, there's always a chance that SpongeBob will be there to witness and assist with the very first kidnapping by an even tinier Plankton. And I'm sure somewhere along the line, SpongeBob's gonna be hoisted up to the surface world again. But that's all speculation, and we'll just have to wait and see. The movie is pitched to release on May 22nd, 2020. Until then, I'll end it off here. Subscribe if you haven't already, but for now, my name's been Dazz. You didn't really care, and I'll see you in a bit. Wow, I had no idea I had so many thoughts on the SpongeBob movies. I think it's time for a 7-month SpongeBob break. Yeah, that sounds good to me. God.
Oh, Your Highness, I'm sure it's not that noticeable. Bob!